From my microphone to your computer, this is Tales from America Hot Mic Episode 2. And I've been meaning to sit down and record a second episode of this show, but nothing really has quite gotten me up and aggravated enough to actually record one of these things. But due to the lack of other people sitting down and providing political commentary that actually asks questions worth asking instead of regurgitating the same old nonsense and conservative talking points for the last 20 years, you're going to have to put up with me. So what was it that set me off enough to sit down and actually turn the microphone on and record a show? Well, there's plenty to talk about. You have the Ministry of Truth that just dropped, and as ridiculous as that is, and as much of an indicator of where we are as that is, it's not what got me aggravated enough to actually turn the microphone on and hit the little red record button. You see, there's another article that hit a little too close to home this morning when I opened up my computer and went through my daily news scroll. Those of you that remember me from the days of Twitter when I was still on there and I wasn't banned for the 5th or 6th time and decided not to come back to that godforsaken social media platform. And regardless of what you think about Elon Musk and his coming and buying out of Twitter, it's not going to make a lick of difference. The man has been pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell, and you better believe he's diddling kids. Same old shit, different person running the show. Regardless, those of you that remember me from those days on Twitter probably know that I owe a majority of my bloodline to the location that this article comes from. So without further ado, what was it that got me so upset I decided to record a second episode of Hot Mic? Well, I saw this article from the Globe and Mail titled, "For Ukraine's Women Refugees, Poland's Strict Abortion and Birth Control Laws Hinder Their Next Steps." Now in truth, the absolute satanic essence, the aura that comes out of this article's title is beyond the words. And it's honestly something we should all come to expect from the usual suspects. I'm sure a lot of you who live in America really couldn't give less of a shit about what happens in Eastern Europe. And in truth, you really have no reason to. You live here, and it's on the other side of the world. We have all of the resources needed to run our society, and what goes on there doesn't really concern us. But the reason why you should give a shit is because of the severity and the extent of the anti-white narrative that's being put in the newspapers and what's being fed to your parents, your kids, and your brothers and sisters and other family members and friends because they can't consider things outside of what their memory allows them to process. And of course, their memory lasts no longer than a week or two at best. It wasn't enough that the Jewish global elite started this war between Russia and Ukraine, actually launched it off into something where bodies were starting to drop on either side, and not just in the Donbass area, okay? This whole thing would not have gotten down if it wasn't for America's constant pot stirring from our sitting president, our media officials, and these defense industry shills. So while you're sitting there at home paying your taxes, eating your Cheetos and watching Major League Baseball, America is sending millions of dollars in equipment over to Ukraine. And let me tell you, Ukraine is going to run out of men faster than they're going to run out of weapons being supplied to them from us. Meanwhile, every single thing we send there is just another $1 million in the pockets of the pieces of shit that run our country. It wasn't a year after we left Afghanistan that America couldn't stand not being involved in a war for a second. So what did we do? We started another war, this time in a beautiful place where we could supply them weapons, get the defense industry money rolling, and have none of our people involved. We could keep the rah-rah militaristic fervor going because it's not our sons and our brothers going to war and getting killed over nothing. Instead, it's two brother European nations having white people go at it in two countries where these birth rates for white people are below replacement rate. So now you actually have a real war, not just firefights here and there in the Donbass area. And what are they doing? Encouraging civilians to run up to armored vehicles and throw Molotov cocktails at them, when they know damn well that has not been an effective strategy on these kinds of vehicles for at least 50 or 60 years. You've got civilians being gunned down because they're no longer considered civilians. They've now made themselves enemy combatants. You have civilians and soldiers dying on each side, men who cannot afford to be lost as these birth rates are so low, being cut down. And that is not good enough for you. You have to manufacture such conditions where there's an actual war that requires refugees of women and children to leave the country. Meanwhile, not one Western country has actually made a serious peace effort, maybe even asking that these areas in Luhansk and Donetsk democratically vote on whether or not they want to break away. After all, are we not vanguards of democracy over here? Is that not something we hear every fucking day? Whether or not democracy is being killed because some white person said some mean thing on Twitter? I digress. But what do? You create conditions that are so hostile and uncomfortable and dangerous that you have refugees of women leaving in droves from this country. And you ask that in Poland, they make a special rule or some kind of change or some kind of allowance so that you can kill more Ukrainians faster. You want the women to be afforded abortions because they just happen to flee into a country where this isn't allowed and you can't kill more white babies. 60 million Russians and Ukrainians weren't enough for you rat fucks 80 years ago. And you, Ukrainians and Russians, 60 million of your own in 50 years under Jewish rule, and you haven't wised up yet and realized what's going on. You fall for the same tricks just like Americans do. Even if you have been through greater suffering, you'd expect to have more wisdom. I am not speaking as someone who has no interest in your lives. I'm speaking to you as someone who hails from your same homeland, who owes a majority of my blood to the same land you live in. But back to the American audiences that I'm actually speaking to. You need to be paying attention to the narrative that's kicking into overdrive. There is a clear and distinct effort right now in creating as much death and turmoil in white populations as possible. They are doing everything they can to speed along your death, your decline, and your extinction. Over there, they're feeding as many men to the meat grinder to prevent Putin from getting to Zelensky as possible. They're throwing every man in front of a gun, handing him 10 rounds of ammunition, whether or not he's a computer engineer, a teacher, a farmer, anyone who does not belong on the front lines being pushed to create some kind of buffer between Putin and Zelensky from solving their own shit. They're throwing men in the meat grinder as fast as possible, getting their women out of the country and encouraging them to kill their babies all the while. Over here, the effort's not as direct, but it's still very clear. Wherever you look, there's a pointing to miscegenation, whether it's in movies or in television or in schools. On TikTok, an entire generation being niggerfied by social media. It's so prevalent and so obvious that even the president had made a mention. Joe Biden, the demented old retard himself, had made mention. You see in the commercials a black and white couple, and you think that it's not an intentional thing? And meanwhile, you have late-night hosts and television personalities directly saying that white people will be extinct very soon, and it's a good thing. That our populations are being replaced either by immigrant, abortion, or the next thing I'm going to get to, probably the most heinous out of all of them. It wasn't enough, listeners, that they take our race. Their attempt is to steal our very souls, to destroy the souls of our children, to turn them against us. The Jew knows the Old Testament very well, and he knows what happens when you turn a people away from Christ. Twisted in their resentment, their bitterness, and their anger, that God deemed them no longer worthy for anything and cast them aside for their sins and their disgusting behavior, he bestowed upon the rest of the people of the world instead the gift of eternal life. And for them, those who decide not to believe in Christ, to be cast into outer darkness where there's gnashing and weeping and bitterness forever. He knows, this Jew knows what happens when you turn these people away from God. And so they do it to us and to our children. They help along the process because they know if their goal is to utterly annihilate our people, all he has to do is turn us away from God and turn us towards him. In his ways, in his worldly ways, because to the Jew there is nothing else but this life on earth. And so I point you to Deuteronomy 28 to look and have a sneak peek at exactly what's going on. I will read this to you and you tell me if this is not exactly what's happening to us in our communities before I move on to the final thing, our reference to the utter annihilation of our people that's going on, the most satanic way and method that it's being done. From Deuteronomy 28, that it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, his statutes, which I command you today, that all of these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your land, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Before we continue, keep in mind, what is the product of the fruit of our land? Soy, corn, our food is totally poisoned and destroying the testosterone of our men, destroying the fruit of our bodies, the increase in our cattle and the offspring of our flocks. Have you looked at the price of meat lately? They're doing everything they can to get us to eat bugs. The Lord will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do until you are destroyed, until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the plague cling to you until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. Here we are in one of the most beautiful and resource-rich areas on the planet. Taking this land from a group of Stone Age savages who couldn't take 5 minutes away from genociding each other and enslaving the rest that they could actually afford to take care of, we turned this thing into a powerhouse of economy, a powerhouse of beauty, and a powerhouse of white culture. Say what you want about our current corruption, but before this, there was some true beauty and true American sense of adventure and sense of innovation and building that this country did possess. And no longer is this the case. We are being replaced off of our own homes. Put the immigration aside. If you closed the border tomorrow and just had these current populations here, Gen Z is already 40% white, and we would be replaced and lose our home by merit of just not having children. These are the effects of turning away from God. The Lord will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me. You shall betroth a wife, but another man shall lie with her. You shall build a house, but you shall not dwell in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but shall not gather its grapes. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your donkey shall be violently taken away from you, and shall not be restored to you. This country is capable of giving people a living wage. Everyone who works here who is a white European male, we have the ability to give ourselves prosperity and a beautiful life. But here it is, the fruits of our labor. Our ox is slaughtered and given away to another nation that lives here. Our donkey is taken away from us. Our means of working is no longer here. It's being outsourced outside of this country. The possibility of having a family is being pulled away from our very eyes. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, and your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no strength in your hand. And therein lies the final way that they're working to destroy us. It's not as direct as what's going on in Ukraine, but pay attention. Your sons and your daughters are being given away to this evil tribe of people, the same tribe that gave origin to people, monsters, like Magnus Hirschfeld and John Money. Your sons and your daughters are being taken from your homes and sent to public school for 8 hours a day, where they're being told that they're not boys and they're not girls. That at 6, 7, or 8 years old, they need to have their genitals cut off and taken puberty blockers so that they get osteoporosis and undersized organs, and their IQ drops by 20 points because their brain stops developing. An entire generation of children, through mandatory compulsory education, are being totally destroyed. That even if they somehow made it to adulthood and maturity, and even somehow managed to overcome the absolutely destroyed relationship between men and women in this country, even if they were to get that far, they no longer have the ability to even produce offspring, because they've either masturbated themselves into infertility or erectile dysfunction, or in the case of women can no longer pair bond because they've had sex with so many people before they got married, because being a virgin before marriage is not cool, not fun, and you can't have good sex. That even if they got that far, they are poisoned and they are unable to have healthy children. That their bodies, vaccinated with some untested nonsense with 9 pages of serious side effects, render them infertile. And their children that come out of them will be racked with allergies, asthma, breathing problems, deformities. And on top of this, even if they've managed to overcome everything I've previously listed, it's the inability to run a household on a healthy income. Instead, both parents have to be working 40 or even 60-hour work weeks where their children no longer see their parents. You have to understand the most healthy thing to develop a sense of racial awareness, and the most healthy thing to establish a healthy spiritual life and a healthy future generation is that these children have a healthy relationship with the primary people in their lives, their first relationship from birth, and that is their parents. Listeners, you live in a country where hospitals charge mothers for skin-to-skin contact with their newborn children, where they charge $7,000 just to mutilate the penises of these boys that are born into this country, marked from birth as golems and slaves, goyim, to the Jews who run us. Why else would we be circumcised en masse? Christians have no need to be circumcised. And what was the prerequisite for every foreign country in the Old Testament to be brought under the rule of either the Jews or to become allies with them? It was for their men and their boys to be circumcised and be marked as subservient to this group of people. So where does that leave us? For Ukraine's women refugees, leaving the country before the trains have even finished dropping off people from a war zone that this international cabal has created, they ask that the babies, the most innocent among them, who asked for none of this, be pulled from their mother. The most evil, opposite, reversed, twisted sense of love, the act which most defines evil and Satanism. That a mother, the most purest love that there exists, the love that a mother has for her child, be turned into hatred as she loves herself instead and robs the life away. To the author of this article, I offer only this. I hope you and your tribe, your ilk that seeks to destroy my people, are dealt with in such a way that whoever hears about it has their ears tingle. I hope that as someone who wipes down a dish and turns it over so that there's nothing left within it, or even on it, or even proof that things were in that dish, I hope that God does the same to you. This has been Tales from America. God save the Slav. God save the white man. Hail Christ. Hail victory.